We are back with another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Is there any hope for former first-round pick Gavin Cross? I'm going to compare the Royals rebuild to the Arizona Diamondbacks rebuild. And lastly, who's the most likely to be traded in the offseason? That's all coming up next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can catch all these podcasting episodes wherever you get your podcast. That could be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. And if you're listening on one of those podcasting apps, leave a review, rate it. We need to better this podcast. We need to make this podcast the best it can possibly be. The only way we can do that is if we get feedback from you, the listeners, you, the fans. So would greatly appreciate it if you continue to rate us on those podcasting pages, follow along on YouTube, share it with other people. We want to build this thing up to be as big as possible. This is your first episode ever tuning in. Of course, welcome in. My name is Jack Johnson, of course, as already mentioned, and I'm a lifelong Royals fan, as I'm sure you are. I now work in Kansas City at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I've got a morning show at ESPN Kansas City. I've got once a week a night show on Sports Radio 810 WHB. So if you ever want to hear me on that platform, you can always go to their social media accounts, their podcasting pages, and it shouldn't be too hard to find my episodes. As for today, today's show is brought to you by Sleeper. I've got some fun picks for the weekend. We're going to have divisional series baseball all weekend long. It'll be a fun sports weekend in general. MLB playoffs, you'll have college football, you'll have NFL. Really can't get enough sports right now, and that's why I think October is one of the best months all year round. But this is a baseball podcast. We're going to talk baseball, and even if this team's not in the postseason, which they aren't, we're going to talk about this team in length throughout the offseason. We're going to bring up hypotheticals. We're going to talk about good things, bad things. We're going to have probably stories on players that get signed, players that get traded. We're actually going to talk about guys that are likely to be traded later on in the show today. And I think that's a good thing for this offseason. I think everybody here at Locked On, or if you're covering a team, you are reporting on a team, you're talking about a team, everybody wants to be in the postseason. But this is our chance, Locked On Royals chance to really build up this channel. And hopefully this is a fun off season. And right now, the only thing Royals fans have to be excited about is the Arizona Fall League and which young players are performing well there, which guys are underperforming, which guys are staying healthy, which guys surprising, overachieving, underachieving, all those things. Well, one guy I certainly have my eye on, as I'm sure many Royals fans out there have had their eye on for a while now, is Gavin Cross. And Gavin Cross, to me, is entering the biggest offseason, the biggest regular season next year of his entire life. This is a monumental next 5 to 6 months for him, because there's a stigma. We all know about the stigma with the Royals and drafting first rounders. I mean, you have guys that maybe get one season in low A, and then that's about it. Or you have guys that do progress well, and they never turn into anything at the big league level. Gavin Cross, I think, is an interesting case. You've heard me say interesting case a lot, and you're probably saying, well, we hear this all the time about guys you're talking about. The reason I think he's interesting is kind of like with Asa Lacy. It wasn't a bad pick at the time. I mean, the Royals got a college bat that was one of the better college bats in the draft. He had a big frame, could play all three outfield spots. We've seen him play center, left, and right. Problem is, hasn't really been able to stay healthy. And when he's on the field, he's a shell of his former self. And that's why I think this is such a big season because he's not a 8th round pick. He's not a 9th round pick. If he was, we wouldn't be dedicating a segment on this podcast for him. Everybody knows he's a 1st round pick. Everybody knows that he was the last 1st round pick for Dayton Moore, or at least while he was the general manager and president of baseball operations. There's always going to be that feeling, that aura around him that he was the last 1st rounder taken by Dayton Moore. So, of course, that pick's not really going to work out, but I'm not there quite yet. I think physically, I think mentally, he has to get right. And once he can get right, we can see the 2022 version of Gavin Cross that had an OPS north of 1,000, had an OBP north of 400. It was only 26 games, but that was something to work with. And that was something when I looked at the Royals farm system to begin the year, I had hope for. I looked at it and I said, this is one of those guys that can move quickly. When the Royals drafted him, I thought outfield depth is limited. Though he's a left-handed bat, he's got some pop, showed pop in college. So to me, it felt like this is a guy that can move through the ranks. Now I was hoping to see Gavin Cross pounding on the door of AAA by the end of the year, if not in AAA, because he's a college bat and he's a 1st rounder. You got to move quickly. So the hope for him is that the Arizona Fall League goes well. It's so early, you can't really tell much. And I believe he's already got a hit and a stolen base. That's 1 game. If he can have a strong offseason, physically, mentally gets right, he can go into spring training and try to battle, for a spot in AA again. Start out in AA where they advanced him to, though not really deserving of a promotion. It was more so of let's just get him out of Quad Cities. He gets to AA Northwest Arkansas. I think he had 6 at-bats or something like that. Then he was shut down for the rest of the season because of an illness. If you can get back to AA through this offseason and spring training and start hot there, then I feel a lot better about Gavin Cross. That's when the hope starts to creep back in. And I think we're all hoping to see that because you don't want to give up on a 1st rounder 2 years into his professional career. He's young. He had great success in college. I'm not ready to give up on him just yet. I don't believe, though it's a different position, it's not an Asa Lacy situation. We don't know where Asa Lacy is right now. We did a podcast on that nobody knows where he is. That's not really a thing with Gavin Cross for me. I think with a good Arizona Fall League, which it's already great to see him in the Arizona Fall League, a good start there. You can send him into the offseason working on some things, hopefully has some confidence, comes back in February, joins the team in surprise, and we see him get to compete with big leaguers out there in Arizona. That to me is so important. And the reason I say this is the biggest offseason and next 5 to 6 months of his life in terms of his baseball career, it's because if he doesn't take off next year, then we start to label the guy as a bust. We start to say, okay, we're moving on from Gavin Cross. He'll still be in the system, but we're not looking to 2025, 2026 where we go, all right, I'm penciling in Gavin Cross in this lineup. He's not a top 100 guy. He's still young, but he took a big step backward this past season. But he can still regain a little bit of that stardom, a little bit of that prospect status if he can stay healthy and he mentally can get right. Now, I don't know the guy personally. I'm just saying whenever you struggle, you got to get mentally right because baseball is a lot of mental. It's a mental game. It's not all physical. And when you're struggling, all of us would be struggling mentally with it. If you're physically struggling, you're mentally struggling probably. And you just need to see some balls start to fall. You need to be hitting the ball hard. You need to play great defensively. And hopefully you can carry some momentum, some confidence into surprise in a couple of months. More than a couple of months, a half a year. You get to that point, I start to build that hope back up for the former first-round pick. It's not one of those scenarios for me where it's Asa Lacy. It's not to me one of those scenarios where it's a Kyle Zimmer. It's not a Hunter Dozier situation to me. I still think there is a big league ball player and a good big league ball player in there. It just has a sour taste in everybody's mouth right now because it was another first rounder that struggles at lower levels while everybody else is promoting guys quickly. The Royals don't seem to do that. but there still is time. There still is hope for a guy like Gavin Cross. I'm not ready to give up on him yet. Some of you maybe have the pessimism towards the scouting department, towards the player development. I still think they can fix Gavin Cross, but it starts at the Arizona Fall League. It's got to start there and take that momentum into spring training here in about a half a year. Okay, the next thing we're going to dive into is with one of the postseason teams in baseball right now, and kind of reminds me of the 2014 Royals, but I'm not going to be talking about the 2014 Royals. It's the Arizona Diamondbacks and what they looked like back in 2021, where they compare to the 2023 Royals. That's coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to one of today's title sponsors in Sleeper. Now, it's been a while. We're not going to have any more fantasy baseball picks for the Royals because they're no longer playing. But it's postseason baseball time, and I've been having a blast making some picks for my fantasy team, and I'm going to let you in on some of my picks. Number one I have here goes in the first game we'll see on Saturday, the American League Divisional Series between the Texas Rangers and the Baltimore Orioles. Give me Corey Seager to have a multi-hit game. I like the way this Texas pitching has been. I like the starting rotation. I think the bullpen, which is probably one of the worst bullpens in the postseason, they were pretty good in Tampa. But this offense is led by their true MVP candidate in Corey Seager. I feel like he is somebody that can carry this offense. And if Texas is to win this series, it's probably going to be because he has a big-time game. So I will take Corey Seager to have a multi-hit game in Game 1 of the American League Divisional Series. Number 2 on my list, I hate to pick this, but I feel like I got to go against an AL Central team here, the Minnesota Twins. It was awesome to see them break that losing streak, but they're going to be facing Justin Verlander in the postseason in Game 1 and at Minute Maid Park. It's a Twins lineup that wasn't particularly special against the Toronto Blue Jays, but it was more so their pitching staff. Now you're going to get a much better pitcher, and you're going to be on the road. I feel like JV is going to shove, so give me JV to record at least 6 innings and give up less than 3 runs. So a quality start for JV in Game 1, but I feel pretty confident with his postseason success that he will be able to do that. Now, with Sleeper, the MLB playoffs are in full swing, which means the clock is ticking on your chance to make a lot of money. Let's just be honest with it on daily fantasy baseball. Baseball has never been more exciting than it is now with studs like Ronald Acuna Jr., Mookie Betts, and Shohei Ohtani. Pick more or less on stats for these stars like home runs, hits, strikeouts, and more for up to 100 times the payout on Sleeper. Get your picks right, and you could win big with Sleeper. You know, I am somebody that even when the Royals season ends, maybe you are this person too, maybe you're not. I am one of those people that loves to continue watching baseball. I loved watching the Twins series. I have had a great time watching the Philly series that was against Miami. It wasn't very entertaining, but I liked seeing the parks packed, except for Tampa Bay at Tropicana Field. I get that part of it, but Philadelphia was rocking. Atlanta's going to be rocking this weekend. Camden is going to be on fire this weekend. I mean, really across the board, I believe that postseason baseball is the best thing to watch. There really is nothing like it. I'm a huge football fan. I feel like I've said it multiple times on the show before. It doesn't compare to postseason baseball to me. It just doesn't, because usually on Sundays in the NFL, if you're a good team, you got a sold-out stadium. Sold-out stadiums don't happen all the time in baseball. When you see it like this and in full swing, it's ridiculous. But I would say the series I had the most fun watching was Arizona and Milwaukee, because Arizona was that team I just kind of circled and said, I'm going to watch them this postseason. Whether they're eliminated in 2 games by Milwaukee or they go on and face the Dodgers like they are, I want to watch their games. I want to stay up late, watch their games. They've had the nightcap the first 2 nights of the wild card series. You know, I enjoyed watching them because I could picture in a future world the Royals being a similar team. And I don't think it's outlandish. I think if you want to dream a little bit and what J.J. Piccolo is trying to do step by step, it makes a lot of sense and lines up with the 2021 Arizona Diamondbacks. Now, here are some numbers that I gathered, and I looked over the stats and the players. I think they kind of compare to where the Royals are right now. Now, in 2021, people forget this. They were in a gauntlet of a division, so let's get that right out there. They were playing the Giants when they were ridiculous. The Giants won, I think, 108 games that year. And then you had the Dodgers, of course, in that division, the Padres. It was never ending. I mean, they literally got screwed over by a great division. But they lost 110 games. They were 52-110. And Torey Lovullo was the man in charge. Because Torey Lovullo took over a while back. I mean, Torey Lovullo has been the manager of the Arizona Diamondbacks for quite some time. I mean, you have to go back to 2017. I mean, he has really been sticking with this situation. But I go to 2021. So, funny enough, the Diamondbacks and the Royals had the same record in the COVID year. They're 25-35. 2021, Royals spent a little bit of money, sort of abandoned their rebuild. And that's showing today why the Royals have 106 losses. The Diamondbacks are in the postseason. But the D-backs were 52-110. Here was their lineup. And some of the names you may recognize. Carson Kelly. Remember, Carson Kelly is now in Detroit, if I'm not mistaken. So Carson Kelly, no longer on the team. Christian Walker. We have seen Christian Walker be a stud at the big league level. Also a Gold Glover as well. And he was great this year. Nearly a 4-WAR player. Well, he was on that team, and he was 30, so he's one of the older guys there. You had Josh Van Meter at second base. He didn't stick around too long. Nick Ahmed. And Nick Ahmed had a long time in Arizona, but not going to be on the postseason team, of course. Eduardo Escobar was on that team, a little bit older. David Peralta, older. Really, the only stud they had in the lineup was Ketel Marte, and he played 90 games that year. We know how good Ketel Marte is. Rotation-wise, it was better than the Royals. I'll give them that. They had Merrill Kelly. They have Madison Bumgarner, Zach Gallen, who, of course, is the ace now, Taylor Widener, and Luke Weaver, former Royal Luke Weaver. But there's one guy truly in there. Actually, I'll go two there because I'm going to give my praise to Merrill Kelly because Merrill Kelly was great this year. But two guys. So there were two guys in the rotation that year that you could kind of have hope for the future. The lineup, there was maybe 1, 2, 3 guys. Sound familiar? I mean, Ketel Marte kind of feels a lot like the Bobby Witt Jr. of that team. You have somebody like, back then, a Pavin Smith. Carson Kelly, probably Diamondbacks back then felt pretty good about Carson Kelly. Rotation, you had Gallen, you had Merrill Kelly. The Royals kind of feel in that same boat where you lost a lot of games, but there are some guys you build around. There are some guys that you think can really make a difference here in 2 to 3 years. Now, here's the interesting part. The next year, Arizona improved their win total by 22 games. And that's kind of along the lines of what J.J. Picollo is trying to do. He wants to improve by 25 to 30, so a little bit more of a step up. They added that year Geraldo Perdomo, who we've seen play shortstop for them. They added Josh Rojas to that lineup. Alec Thomas. Dalton Varsho was on that team. Seth Beer was on that team. Jake McCarthy was on that team. So you have a little bit more of a younger team, but won more games. Only guy you really added the rotation was Zach Davies. And then you had Mark Melancon in the back end of that bullpen. Joe Mantiply, who's been great for Arizona this year. They went out and built a little bit of a bullpen. And it changed things. Now their division got a little bit weaker, but they won 74 games. And then, of course, this year, they improved their win total by 10 games and get into the wild card at 84-78. All I'm saying, if they can do some things right, if they can make the right moves at the right time, of course, hindsight's 20/20. It's more so of a hope at this point, a prayer at this point. But the D-backs lost 110 games. Do you think anybody back then said in 2 years they will be winning playoff series? Some maybe. The optimistic people would. I consider myself at times a bit of an optimist. I also can be very pessimistic. But I would say if this is the time, I think that J.J. Picollo, I've been trying to find the team the Royals can mimic, can emulate. And Arizona, to me, keeps popping back up. They've got Corbin Carroll now, who is Bobby Witt Jr. These guys are very similar. And then you look at some of the younger guys. Now, they're younger than the Royals and performing at a much higher rate. But Gabby Moreno, right, catcher, I mean, that's just one of the younger guys there. I don't want to say he's MJ Melendez, but you're hoping MJ can become that. He's only a year older. You have the Alec Thomas, the Jake McCarthy. And the rotation, you got your ace, Zach Gowen. You hope that can be your Cole Reagans. Merrill Kelly, been very consistent. You hope Brady Singer could be that. You hope a Daniel Lynch could be that. I know that I'm just throwing names against the wall here, but J.J. Picollo could be. I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea. Could be looking at the model that Arizona had. Arizona spent a little bit of money on the bullpen, brought in some guys that could really lock down the back end of games. They improved their win total by 22 games. I would take that in a heartbeat. If the Royals were 74-88 next year, take it in a heartbeat. As long as you continue that steady trend. As long as you can continue to build. And that's why I think this is the model you need to follow. Now, they loaded up on talent in the farm system, and they continue to pump guys out, develop guys. And, it was ugly in 2021, but it got much better in 22. And they're a playoff team in 2023, and the team I'm rooting for. Because they're young, they're fun, they're passionate, and they've got guys that can play, flat out play. Corbin Carroll's one of my favorite guys in the entire postseason. And he reminds me a lot of Bobby Witt Jr., but a left-handed Bobby Witt Jr. He's the face of Arizona baseball. And I'm curious to see how they stack up against the Dodgers, but not a bad model to follow. If you want to be in the postseason in 2 years, which seems like a pipe dream, look to Arizona. Look how they did certain things. I think it's a great path to follow. Okay, the last thing that we're going to go over is guys that are likely to be traded. Who are some Royals players that should be on the move and are likely to be on the move? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to one of today's other sponsors in Bunches. Okay, Locked On Royals fans. You may have heard us talk about the free new app just for sports fans called Bunches. Bunches is a new social network built for sports fans. No politics, no doom and gloom, unless you're a Yankees fan, just sports. They've recently released a new scoreboard feature that lets you check live scores in the app and chat about live games as they happen. You can chat about the Royals and join the Locked On Bunch by clicking the link in the show notes description that I always post to go and get the app or go to the Apple Store and download Bunches now. So download the Bunches app today, and when you do, our friends at Bunches have featured the Locked On MLB Bunch in the Discover tab. You can also click on the link in the description show notes to join the Locked On MLB Bunch community today. So go out there and download the Bunches app. It's a lot of fun, and talk with other fans about Royals, baseball, postseason, whatever you want to dive into. The last thing I want to go over is I think we're going to probably be going over in a lot of episodes this offseason. Guys that are likely to be traded. Now, my opinion has completely changed in a span of about a month. I at one point said Carlos Hernandez can be traded. Singer's getting traded. Salvi's getting traded. I would say that you had guys like MJ Melendez that could be getting traded. But I'm just starting to think that the majority of those guys are going to stick around another year. I mean, J.J. Picollo in his press conference the other day, penciled in Brady Singer as a part of the rotation. So that tells me, even though there could be a bit of a smokescreen, that tells me that Brady's going to be around. Salvador Perez, I think, could get moved. We keep talking Miami, and they just fell short in the postseason. They got a buzzsaw in Philadelphia, but they could have used an experienced postseason guy and maybe an extra bat to the middle of their lineup. I will say this, though. Salvador Perez just doesn't seem as likely to be traded because so much money has to be involved. And he's also coming off a very down year. Maybe you bring Salvi back. I mean, he's under contract. It's not like you have to bring him back. I would just say Salvi's the guy I think I'm watching. I'm watching because I think if he has a really good first half, he can DH a lot, he's healthy, and that power comes back, that's when I'm considering a trade. But not after this year, not after the injuries that piled up, and not after, you've already kind of entertained it. I mean, I'm sure you're going to get calls again, but if you're having to pay a chunk of the contract and you're not going to get the biggest of returns, it doesn't make too much sense to me. I mean, that just really isn't a scenario that right now I think benefits the Royals. Now, he goes and hits his tail off for 2 months. Revisit that. Revisit that trade because you might not have to pay as much money when unloading him in a deal. Think about it. And right now, teams are going to be asking the Royals to pay the majority of that contract. Do you want to pay somebody else for Salvador Perez to hit against you? I don't think the return's there. I'm all for big returns, but I don't think you're getting the return you think you are. Singer, same thing. I don't know why now would be the time to trade him. He's coming off a career worst year. Now, Carlos Hernandez made sense 3 months ago. Not so much now. You got to hold it. You're trying to build a bullpen. Clearly, Carlos Hernandez in the first half fits that bullpen. Second half, absolutely not. But I will say one guy to me who feels very likely to be traded because I don't think the Royals have a spot for him. It's Edward Olivares. Edward Olivares, to me, hit his way in the second half to becoming a trade piece. And a team that makes a ton of sense is the Giants. The Giants need more offense. And Olivares is not going to be able to play right field very well there, but he was an above-average hitter this year. He doesn't strike out a lot. He hits the ball hard. In his last 30 games, he had a triple slash with a batting average of .302. OBP was north of 340. The slugging was very high. All of a sudden, we saw this power get tapped into by Eddie O. But to me, he's somebody where you go, he's 27, going to be 28. He can't play the field. Do you want that in a team that's still trying to bring in talent? Plus, you have Nelson Velasquez, you have MJ, you have Isbell, you have Waters. Where's he getting at bats? Well, the Royals need pitching. They need bullpen help. Giants have a lot of pitching. And they just fired Gabe Kapler, so they could be looking to unload more guys. Maybe this isn't a team that's going to be competing next year, but try to give them a guy they can work with. There's value in Edward Olivares. He can hit. I feel like he's very likely to be traded in the offseason because of a roster crunch and because really, at the end of the day, teams need an Edward Olivares. Contending teams do. A bench bat. The Royals don't need a bench bat in Edward Olivares. They need an everyday player that can field. He can't give you that. The next guy I think that is very likely to be traded is probably either a Kyle Isbell or a Drew Waters. One of those guys has to. I mean, J.J. Picollo said that they found out Kyle Isbell could play center field and they like him there, so maybe Waters on the outside. I think they would trade one of those two over MJ. Now, I've heard MJ from fans that, that's a good trade piece. I don't think they're going to trade MJ. I'd be pretty shocked if they did because the way he finished in the second half and he kind of still fits the window. To me, though, Waters or Isbell doesn't. Those guys are on the fringe to me. And if you're looking for pitching, maybe somebody looks at a Drew Waters or a Kyle Isbell and says, we'll give you a bullpen guy. We'll give you a minor leaguer because we need the defense, like Kyle Isbell, or we'll take a former #1 prospect in somebody's system like Drew Waters. And he was that in Atlanta. I mean, look at the Twins. They wanted Michael A. Taylor. Did anybody think Michael A. Taylor was getting dealt last year? No. And he's been their everyday center fielder and been pretty good for them. Not great offensively, but elite defensively. I can see the same thing for Kyle Isbell, and he's younger and more affordable. So to me, one of those two guys feels like the next to be dealt. And then if I had to pick a pitcher, I probably am going to still say Carlos Hernandez because somebody's going to look at the velocity and say, we saw the first half, we want that guy again. And maybe you package a Carlos Hernandez with an Edward Olivares. Sweeten that deal up just a little bit more. It makes sense, but right now, where my mind's at, those feel like the most likely guys to be traded. They could always be trading minor leaguers for more James McArthurs. I certainly am not going to oppose. But right now, if I had to make my picks, those feel like very likely options. Again, could be just me. Let me know in the comment pages on YouTube. Let me know on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15 because I'm curious who you think is the most likely to be traded this offseason. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Until tomorrow for our Mailbag Friday segment, you take it easy, Kansas City.